On this edition of ITG, spring ball is here. What are we looking for? What are some of the biggest storylines? We'll discuss all of that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business.
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
Statistically, always punting on fourth down makes no sense.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 232 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm your host, Wes Euler, flanked as always by the best teammates in the business. I've got the signal caller, Jed Drenning, with me on this one. And as always, we are brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online. The game starts here. And this is a big week for Mountaineer football. It is Combine Week. We will have more as the week rolls along, keeping an eye on Wyatt, on Sean, and on Austin, our trio of Mountaineers in Indianapolis. I will be in Indianapolis for the week as well, too, so we'll have some cool stuff for you as we roll along and get more into the 2025 NFL Combine. But also this week, it's the start of spring practice for WVU football, the 2.0 era of Rich Rodriguez and spring practice, Jed. And with that, obviously, listen, this time of year, always a lot of storylines to look ahead to and to keep an eye on for spring ball. But I think especially signal caller when you're bringing in a brand new coaching staff, that always adds some extra intrigue. And I think with it brings some additional question marks as well, too.
It certainly does. And the question is going to be, starting with Nico, of course. I remember the bowl game. Nico spent some time with Coach Rod, obviously, and I told Nico during the game or even after the game, maybe in the hotel, we had a couple of conversations thereabout. And I said, Nico, live up to it, man. I already told him. I said, you're tougher than a $2 steak. You'll take hard coaching. You'll take it with a smile on your face. You're physically tough. You're mentally tough. And I believe it. Nico's the type of kid who's going to stand in front of the room and take whatever you throw his way, set a great example. And he has that factor that other kids respond to. So I'm eager to see how Nico, and of course we know Nico doesn't shy away from competition. So we're going to get into some of those kids as well. But when you look at what's populating that room, Nico's going to embrace those challenges. No doubt about it. Now, people have been curious, and this isn't a full breakdown or spring preview by any stretch. We'll do some of that later as practices start to play out. But how does Nico fit in Rich's system? Well, this is a system, Wes, that we'll spend a lot of time in the offseason breaking down what this system has in fact done. But it's a system that I threw for 500 yards multiple times in it. It's produced a bunch of 200-yard rushers. It can do a little bit of everything. So you can lean into what the strengths of your personnel might be. I think Nico can be, a lot of it's predicated on quick one-read looks, what Rich asks his quarterbacks and his modern version of his offense to do. And Nico is very decisive in that sense. Think of those RPOs you saw him fire in those times. I think of Arizona in the red zone. I think of the plays that he made against Cincinnati. Those are quick one-read looks, RPOs, quick decisions. So I think Nico could be a fit for this. And he's not just a willing runner, but an able runner. He's a physical kid. We've seen him knock people around. People slide off of him. He's a different kind of runner than what maybe Rich has had in the past. But I'm not so sure. When you look at the quarterback that he had at Jackson State a year ago who didn't arrive on campus until June, same type of thing. He was like a 4.8 guy.
Sure.
He wasn't going to run past a lot of people, but he was just willing, physical, put up some big numbers, was highly productive. So you start with that. What kind of fit will Nico be for what Rich wants to do? And I'm very intrigued by that. But when you look at the competition in the room, a lot of people are going to be talking about Jalen Henderson because of his skill set and his athleticism. Started at Fresno, played in the SEC at Texas A&M. I'm curious and intrigued to see what he brings to the table because he does have that twitch and that burst. And anybody that has that, obviously Rich has a track record of maximizing that and making the most out of it. So for a number of reasons, Jalen Henderson intrigues me. But the guy that I don't know if fans know what to expect from, Max Brown, don't be deceived by what Max Brown did or didn't do at Charlotte. Charlotte was an atrocious football team a year ago. But more specifically, wow, were they bad on offense? And Max Brown, who previously was at the University of Florida, he made a start against the Seminoles, you remember, a couple of years ago. As things were falling apart for Florida down the stretch, they turned to him to try and get a boost or a shot in the arm to start in that rivalry game against the Seminoles. He's a player, but then when he transferred to Charlotte, he was just immersed in this horrible offensive ecosystem. So his numbers weren't real impressive. His tape wasn't real impressive. Don't be deceived by what did or didn't happen at Charlotte. I think his track record before and leading up to Florida, you might have a football player there, and there's going to be some others in the room as well. So let's see how this thing shakes out. Different skill sets, different types of kids, different types of guys. Who's going to respond? Who's going to really take that thing and run with it? And maybe something will be decided by spring. Maybe it won't. You never know. But and Rich has even said, look, I'd like to get 10 kids in that room because he wants to foster as much competition as possible. But once again, I double back to this. I don't care whether you have 3, 5, 10, or 15. Nico Marchio is not going to shy away from that competition. And we'll find out if these other kids do as well. And, you got Scotty Fox coming as a freshman next year. You won't see him in the spring. It's more of a spring discussion. So that's a great place to start. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm fired up to see what, in fact, Nico can do when he's plugged into this system that Owen and I are very familiar with, that I've seen just a wide array of different types of quarterbacks. So I don't think you can get much different than me and Pat White. And we both had a lot of success in the system. So that just speaks to the versatility of the system. So let's see how it goes. I'm fired up.
Well, Jed, I just want you to know, when I think about the most successful quarterbacks in Rich Rodriguez's systems, after Pat White, I quickly think of Jed Drenning. So I just want you to know that you come up on my list before any of these other guys, before Rasheed Marshall, before Denard Robinson, before Tate, before any of these names. I got you, baby. And listen, you and I are not reinventing the wheel here with starting here. I mean, but this is football at any level. When you're talking about an off season, when you're talking about spring practice, when you're talking about training camp, whatever the topic might be, if you don't have that nailed on, no doubt this guy is our starting quarterback. Quite often, that's where the intrigue begins. It doesn't matter if this is a high school football team, a college football team, or an NFL team. So, of course, I think that is at the forefront of everybody's mind. A thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford and our guy JR for being a presenting sponsor of ITG. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Shout out to everybody there at Team Toothman. Nico Marchiol is a Toothman guy. He's built Ford tough. I'm with you on that. I think if there was any notion in his mind of shying away from this new era and everything and all the competition that will come with that, we would have seen him put his name in the transfer portal a few months ago. Now, that obviously does not guarantee that he will be on the roster in the fall. Any of these guys that are still here, it's not a guarantee that they'll be on the roster in the fall, as there will be more portal windows between now and then, and there will be, make no mistake about it, moving and shaking. There will be more imports and exports before the summer, certainly, and before we get ready for the fall. But Jed, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Practice starts Tuesday.
Correct. That's a big part of the reason why they're starting early. Yeah. Is to get ahead of that April portal window.
April 5th. So, you got a nice run up to that window, that next window. So, there's going to be some moving and shaking. No about it. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, the final intriguing kind of thing of the quarterback conversation for me is, off of the just how much we've talked about Pat White in general and then him coming back to the program in an official coaching capacity. Nico Marchiol, Jalen Henderson, both lefties as well too, Jed. So maybe we'll continue the streak here. But yeah, like to me, that's where I think again, it doesn't matter if you fancy yourself a hardcore fan who really focuses on these type of things, or if you were just somebody more casual. You always want to kind of know what's going on with that quarterback position, because that is such a large part of your success, obviously.
There's no doubt about it. And I just want to see, there's two things they have to acclimate to. First of all, the system and the scheme, but second of all, the type of coaching. It's going to be a very rugged type of coaching, and it's not for everybody. But you know what? In talking to some of those kids who transferred up from Jack State, we'll talk about this here in a bit, but I had a conversation with Fred Perry. He was around the facility when I was in there, and talking to him, and he's like, "Look, I like to be coached hard. That's why I'm here." So that's not for everybody, but
No,
those
but
that it appeals to, you can quickly find out or quickly see. It's readily apparent. And I know Nico, I don't know the others. And that's why I keep speaking to Nico. Nico's the type of kid that I can promise you that's going to appeal to him. He's not going to shy away from it. As to the others, I don't know. I haven't been around them. Can't speak to that. But so the type of coaching and how they acclimate to the schemes. There's a lot to look at here. New personnel all around them, new scheme, everything's new, new, new.
mm-hmm.
That new car smell across the board. Every single part of this spring practice is going to be new. So, but great place to start is the quarterback conversation.
Yeah, it always is. And you know what? Let's stay on that side of the football. I'm also intrigued to see how everything plays out at the running back position. I know we obviously have much more of an incumbent at that position in Jaheim White than we do at the quarterback position. And there is rightfully so a lot of excitement around Jaheim White, his skill set, and what that could look like in a Rich Rodriguez offense. But I also, when you have a new coaching staff, nothing is a foregone conclusion, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how good you've been with a previous coaching staff. There is always kind of that blank slate element. And just even if Jaheim White does end up being the kind of quote unquote bell cow that I think we all expect him to be, there's still a lot of opportunity elsewhere, and there's still a lot of new faces in that regard elsewhere. How does Ty Edwards look? How does LJ Turner look? A guy like Travion Dunbar, who I think has a very unique skill set. While we're familiar, Jed, with Jaheim White, we're not familiar with him necessarily in this offense, and we're not familiar with many of the other names on or populating that position group as well, too. For obvious reasons, we know how important that group is to this Rich Rodriguez offense. So I know a lot of people running back might not be at the forefront because they just kind of think we got Jaheim White and giddy up, here we go. But I also don't think it's quite that simple.
We're not familiar with Jaheim, or are we? I mean, I look at that and boy, I see a comp. If you think back, and you're probably too young for this, Wes, but when I think of Avon,
I
here's the
thought
thing
that
with
might be
Avon.
where you're going.
Avon's senior year in high school, he was dynamic, he was explosive. When he was at Holy Cross in New Jersey, he was just a dynamic, explosive football player. His senior year, and I think this is one of the reasons that West Virginia had such a real opportunity to land him. He had a pretty vicious ACL injury, and that on some level negated part of the speed element of his game. He was still as shifty as ever, and he was an east-west, just boy, he had a nose for everything. But that separation speed that maybe existed prior to that injury in high school, when I look at Jaheim, that's kind of what I see. I see Avon without that ACL injury taking away that extra
Yeah,
gear.
yeah.
Because in some respects, Jaheim has always reminded me with that shifty nature and that vision that he has of the same style of play that. Now, first of all, you got several thousand more yards to go before I'm going to give you a direct comp to Avon
That's right.
Coburn because he is one of the most established, running backs in the history of the sport. There are a very short list of people when you look at it. I was just looking at it a couple weeks ago who have eclipsed 5,000 career rushing yards. But so Jaheim has that type of skill set with added bursts. So I'm eager to see within an offense that's almost relentlessly in attack mode, running the football, establishing a downhill presence, what that might look like with Jaheim. And when you look at some of the other additions, first of all, we got a couple freshmen that we're high on that were part of what we were doing last year, and I think we continue to be high on them. Some members of the staff had previously recruited those kids in high school as well. So there were some pre-existing relationships. So that's something to consider. But when you look at LJ Turner and Ty Edwards, those are the two portal acquisitions. LJ Turner, small, shifty, and terribly explosive kid from Catawba, smaller college kid. Now, you're going to have to resist yourself to pull away from making the Des Reed comps from what Pitt got out of that kid right out of the gates, because that just doesn't happen often, right? But that's the style of football player you're looking at. Now, whether or not that translates from the level of Catawba to West Virginia in the Big 12, we'll see. But he's a kid with a lot of burst, very explosive, very twitchy. And Ty Edwards, a big kid. I watched both these kids on tape, and one of the tapes that I watched with Ty Edwards, I watched him in action against North Dakota State. And obviously, at the FCS level, you talk about that's as good as it gets. That's a program that I have incredible respect for. And he was playing a very physical brand of football and a very productive brand of football when he was at Northern Iowa. He had a game. It was late in the year, and he ran for about 230. It was against Indiana State, and he was just unstoppable in that game. It was almost like that's probably when he decided, hey, I'm jumping to the portal, and see what happens here. You almost get the sense that from a timing standpoint, because he's 6'4", 230 pounds. Now again, some people might hear that frame and think, okay, let's go KJ Harris, because KJ was cut and KJ was explosive and I burst. This kid's a little different. His style's more physical than what KJ's was. Uh, at least it was at UNI. Now, again, the question is, will it translate? How will he acclimate in that room? Because once again, the big question will be, Wes, in that running back room, in the quarterback room, everything's going to go as far as, and this is the big elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet at all, and that's the offensive line. You talk about new faces.
Yeah.
Holy cow! Landon Livingston and a cast of thousands. Because we were hit with massive attrition there. So a lot of acquisitions there. I see us taking that position group and continuing to build with it probably through the April window into May, maybe even into June. It's hard to say because you need to find it too deep. So it's going to be incredibly new. A new offensive line coach and Coach Bicknell, who Coach Rod played against at Boston College in West Virginia, but he also coached with them at Ole Miss back in 2019. So has a bit of a history with him. He understands what Coach Rod does. So let's see what you can do to glue together five starters and then start looking for some depth with that offensive line. But that's what I wanted to get your thoughts on. I mean, the bells and whistles and the shiny parts are the skill guys, of course, and it makes perfect sense to start all conversations, as you said, with the quarterback, and then you got to go to Jaheim because he's the headliner. I mean, if we got a headliner coming back on either side of the ball, it's Jaheim White.
No
So you'd be
doubt.
remiss not to discuss that and what that room might look like. But this offensive line, of course, the demands are different. It truly is more of five locked in as a unit with this very heavy zone blocking scheme. Now there's some counter action. You have some power game, power elements as well, but zone blocking is incredibly heavy. Different skill set. Owen and I have discussed it, but it's going to be interesting to watch how this group comes together. As much as any, that's what I want to keep an eye on. I want to watch Jack McNeil with that offensive line, with all this wide array of characters from all these different backgrounds that don't know much about anything in terms of each other, coming together to try and make this thing happen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There have been some intriguing additions to that group, right? From a lot of different types of programs and skill sets. Guys like Walter Youngbear, and you love that name. Chemo from LSU, whose last name I'm not even going to try and pronounce because I'm going to butcher it. Offensive line, defensive line. Could he be back as a guard with the Mountaineers? Tykeist Crawford, the pickup from Arkansas, who I think could play loom in a large role at tackle. You're right. Listen, the offensive line at every level of football, but I think specifically in a system like this, like they have to be five fingers on a fist, an offensive line. Football is the ultimate team game, and the offensive line is the ultimate example of that. More so than any unit on a football team, they can play above their skill set as a group. They can also play below their skill set as a group. It just depends on that chemistry and that cohesion. So a lot of different parts. I think there's a lot to be excited about, but with some question marks as well, too. And how quickly can all of those guys come together here in the spring and then into the summer when, like you said, I mean, you like having Landon Livingston back, but other than that, it is, a lot of guys who are still going to be trying to find their class buildings and where the grocery stores are in Morgantown, and a lot of guys that are trying to hop on a moving train here very quickly.
Yeah, and we like to discuss both the good and the bad of the transfer portal, right? And I think back to 2019, how handy would a transfer portal have been Neil's first year when it was Colton McKivitz and everybody else, right? And we really, you talk about a bare cupboard. Well, we didn't have a transfer portal to address that. Well, fast forward to this offseason, what Rich is trying to do, and you might be saying, well, maybe we wouldn't have lost Tomas and Big John. Yeah, you probably still would have, because when you lose your head coach, that's when the NCAA would allow you to transfer anyway.
Right.
So at least now you have the portal to try and address those needs, which are incredibly pressing. So the question becomes, did you hit on some of those kids? I'm sure some we did. I'm sure some we didn't. But you talked about Crawford. I think what I see with him coming out of Arkansas is a kid with versatility. He played some guard. He played some tackle. He could project a couple different ways here. But, I mean, there are some guys with potential and possibilities. But at the same time, thank goodness the portal exists, because, yes, we still would have lost some of those guys, but we would have been left hanging with no opportunity to fix those issues, just like we were in 2019. The portal at least now puts you in position to address those things much more quickly.
And as you and I know we discussed this on maybe one of our other portal update episodes like a month or so. I know we've discussed this post Rich Rodriguez hire. The good news of this is he's done this recently. He had a ton of turnover in Jacksonville State. Heck, right, Jed? He had 30 new players added to the roster after spring practice alone.
He had 40. 60 altogether, 40 after spring ball.
So, like I said a few minutes ago, there will still be more imports and exports before we before we get to that Robert Morris game.
It's a flowing market. It's going to be a flowing market
before we get to Robert Morris Labor Day weekend. There will be many more imports and plenty of exports as well too. But I think the encouraging part of that is Rich has navigated this recently, and hopefully they're so more comfortable and just easier to hit the ground running in that regard. As again, this is part of the nature of the beast, but at least it's something that he has navigated beforehand and isn't doing this for the first time.
Yes.
Jed, anything else on the offensive side before maybe we take a break and talk some defensive storylines?
The only thing I'd close out with, Wes, is even the tight end room. It's like, here is one of the upsides. The type of kid that Rich might be pursuing at different positions. The good news is that I'm not so sure it might be the most broadly coveted type of kid, which makes their market value much more reasonable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the type of kids that we're scouting and targeting to do what he does and do it well might not be the same type that Michigan is after within their schemes, or Auburn is after within their schemes. So it's kind of different in that sense. We don't necessarily need an NFL left tackle, or we don't necessarily need an NFL tight end. Because their roles and what's asked of them is going to be much different in this style of system. This is a very college-centric system. Mm-hmm. It's not a pro-style system. Right. There might be some pro elements to it, but it's very different in that regard. And that's one of the things that I'm looking at. And it's in part why he was able to do what he was able to do with such turnover at Jack State, for the same reason. Mm-hmm. He was after a bunch of guys that he wasn't having to even out-recruit the rest of Conference USA for, because they were after different types of guys. Liberty was after different types of guys than Jack State was, for that reason. So that might be beneficial in this type of situation in particular.
I think that's well said. I think that's a good way to wrap the offensive portion of this spring ball conversation. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, some storylines, some names, some notable things to watch on the defensive side of the football as spring ball gets underway. We'll discuss that when we return. Wes Euler, Jed Drenning, you are in the gun.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
At Johnston Equipment, you'll find the area's best selection of Coyote tractors and loaders. Stop in and see all our compact equipment with multiple options available, including full cab, diesel, rubber tires, or track loaders. You'll find attachments and implements to get anything done, and low-rate financing options. Johnston Equipment has what you need to get the job done right. Come see the full line today at Johnston Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan, or visit JohnstonEQ.com.
Back in the gun here as we roll along on episode 232 of ITG, taking a look at spring ball getting underway this week. Spent some time on the offense there. Now we will spin the block to the defensive side. And Jed, for me here, the thing at the forefront of my mind is, what are we looking at in the secondary? Because kind of like we talked about with the offensive line, it is mass turnover, a lot of exports, a lot of imports. Garnett Hollis is gone. Aiden Garnes is gone. Anthony Wilson is gone. A lot of new pieces coming in here. And, we have seen an up and down secondary, I think, for the last few years. And a lot of that has related to how they've been able to supplement in the portal. When you're able to go out and get guys like Beanie Bishop, it's ended up pretty well. When you've maybe struggled and haven't hit on some of those, we've seen that play out and translate into struggles on the football field as well. So big kind of eye on that defensive secondary as we get going here for me in spring ball.
Well, Wes, the bad news is everybody's gone. The good news is everybody's gone. It was one of those situations. When you're looking at the struggles that we had, no, it's not just on the back end. It was a collective struggle on the defensive side of the football last year. But the big play bit us so many times. We kind of allowed opposing quarterbacks to get ahead of the chains, stay ahead of the chains, have their way against us. They kept us guessing and not the other way around. From a big play standpoint, the number that jumps out to me, I'm looking at it right here, was 40-plus yard plays allowed through the air, 23 of them, which was 130th in the country. We were 122nd in the country in yards per play allowed total, just overall. So the answers weren't there. And obviously, you're going to dip into the portal. You're going to want some fresh blood. And that's what you're hoping to infuse. I mentioned earlier that we could get into the particulars and the skill sets and the names, but I think the bigger picture of what Zach Alley is going to want to do is really what bears on this conversation. I mentioned earlier, Wes, that I bumped into Fred Perry, defensive back who transferred from Jack State, and he was in the building, and I was talking to him, and I was talking to him about Zach Alley, who he played for 2 years ago in 2023 as the DC at Jack State. And I said, what is it about him that makes him different? And it was more the cracks between the keys was kind of the answer that he provided. He was explaining to me that, look, he just doesn't accept anything less than 11 hats to the ball, proper angles, pure unmitigated hustle. You have to be a dog. And trust me, Fred Perry's a dog. Fred Perry's the guy that I was warned, look, before the season's over, he will hit me on the sidelines. Okay. Accidentally or otherwise, he's going to end up hitting me before the season's over. He was Jack State's Carl Joseph last year is what he was. So he's an exciting addition, but it was nice to talk to him about what Zach Alley is going to do. And what's intriguing to me, Wes, we are going to spend the off season. I mean, I have a million of these different things that I'm looking at. I'm doing 1,000-foot dive into everything Zach Alley's done. I'm going to spend time in the offseason talking about what he comes from. Of course, he comes from Brent Venables' system. I want to talk about where Brent Venables' system comes from back in the K-State days of trying to stop Nebraska. And he's had 3 stops now as a defensive play caller. And so you can get a pretty round and fair assessment of what he wants to do. And I'm looking at some of the differences, and it's because of the pieces that were in place at the 3 different stops. When he was at Louisiana Monroe, they were shorthanded. It was all about trying to get the most out of your Jimmies because the other Joes were just going to be bigger and faster and stronger. So when you look at what he did from a front standpoint, it was a little different with some tweaks compared to what he's done elsewhere. He ran predominantly an odd stack, but he also had elements of the old Venables 4-2-5 because of personnel. He moves to Jack State. His base set was a 3-2-6, again, because of personnel. Still some elements of the odd stack, but you'd see him dip into things where he'd have 2 defensive linemen, 3 backers, and 6 DBs. And now fast forward to Oklahoma. Well, Oklahoma is obviously blessed with more NFL disruptive defensive tackle types, one gap type players. So, yes, you had some even front there, even from a 4-3 standpoint, but that wasn't their number one defense. He was still running some 3-3-5, running some traditional 3-4. So, what I'm getting at there is his personnel does tend to dictate which angle he takes from a creativity standpoint. And boy, is he creative. I've watched a bunch of tape. We're going to have some fun with this. There's going to be a whole series of Zach Alley's defense and offseason episodes that we're going to have some fun with. But that's what I'm intrigued to see. Once he assesses for himself what, in fact, we do have. And if you notice what we tried to do in the portal. Look, the speed dating round, we didn't have much time to evaluate beyond a handful of days and just go for the best and see how it works out. There were a lot of edge rushers. There was a premium on edge rushers. And you know why? Because they're worth their weight in bullion. I mean, irrespective of what you end up doing, any of these fronts or schemes or alignments that I just talked about, you know what fits in all of them? A guy who can bring it off the edge, okay? Because he can put his hand in the dirt and do it. He can stand up as a second level player and do it. So, irrespective of what you're going to do defensively, those guys fit in. So, if you can make a couple of those guys fit and then figure out what your strengths and weaknesses might be on the back end, what your corners can do, who's going to be your boundary corner, your field corner, who you're more comfortable with getting targeted more, who your active safeties are, who's going to get triggered, who can play in space on that back end more. Once those things are more clearly identified, then he can start to scheme. And that's exactly what he does and does well. And once again, if you're breaking this down by position, some of these positions are going to have question marks because we're not familiar with these faces. Sure. I like a couple of the additions we made in the inside backer room. We'll see how that shakes out. We have a couple of kids back as well with Cutter and Carrico. So let's see what happens in the inside backer room with, Chase Wilson transferred from Colorado State. We got the kid from Carolina. So there are some possibilities there. But I think what's going to need to happen and what I'm hoping happens from a relative stability standpoint, the only position maybe on the football team that I can look at and say, okay, I'm somewhat comfortable with what we have returning is on the defensive line.
Yeah.
I mean, there's enough of the Asani Redwood types and the Eddie V's, enough of those guys. We were talking about it during the break.
Finally some familiar names.
That are coming back. That's right. There's some familiar names. So at least we know what we can trust from them, right? So there's that element. So if you can take what you have there and obviously add to it with different pieces, and they may in fact have completely different responsibilities by the time the dust settles with what's asked of them compared to last year. Sure. I mean, he's going to be running a lot of one gap stuff. So, maybe in the past we were running, odd fronts where you're two gapping it. Well, Oklahoma, even when they were playing 3 down, Venables likes to one gap things, and that impacts your fits. It's more difficult to prepare for, I think, offensively. So, again, when I look at Zach Alley and understanding what he's all about and his background and his pedigree, and talking to other guys who have coached with him at previous stops that aren't on this current staff, one of the things he likes to do is master and understand tendencies and then find ways to attack those tendencies from a personnel standpoint or otherwise. He's going to know what a team likes to do in critical situations offensively in a football game. And then he's going to put together a plan to attack what that team likes to do and force them to dribble with their left hand. You'll hear him talk about taking the offense out of its comfort zone. That's coach speak for a lot of guys, but that's really what's got him here. He's done that at a very high level, and he's been able to do that by looking at the kids that populate his defensive roster, seeing what they're good at, what their limitations are, and drafting a scheme that caters to that. And that's whether I'm starting with the defensive backfield or whether I'm starting with the defensive line or, again, looking at the inside backers or some of the edge guys. I'm just more big picture with what Zach Alley's going to do. And I think we'll only get a glimpse of that in the spring, to be honest with you, because that's going to continue to be sorted out, as we talked about, with other changes to the roster through the April window with the portal, through acquisitions in May and June into OTAs in the summer. But by the time we settle into that opener against Robert Morris, he's going to have a plan in place that best fits the personnel on this roster defensively. I'm just intrigued to see what that might look like, because I can make an argument. It can go a lot of different ways just based on the versatility he's demonstrated in the past. And really, the only thing that's changed was, and I understand drastically changed. He constantly tweaks things, but the only drastic change I see is from a blitz standpoint. He was a lot more pressure oriented just from sheer blitzing at Monroe, and that was just because of the limitations of that personnel. That was more, I think, out of desperation trying to make some things happen. At Jack State, he more picks his spots. At Oklahoma, more picks his spots. He's more judicious with those blitzes, but he is incredibly creative. And I don't know if you can tell how excited I am, but I've been watching tape. I've been breaking things down. I got a million tendencies, and his most popular fronts or his favorite fronts and his favorite, whether he's one high shell, two high shell, whether it's middle of the field closed, middle of the field open. Those are the types of things that I've been looking at his previous stops, and we're going to thoroughly cover that in the off season. But we just don't know what the answer might look like at this juncture in terms of, well, what's going to be? I don't know if he's going to line up in a 3-4 on the first snap against Robert Morris.
Sure. I
don't know if he's going to line up in a 4-3, a 4-2-5, this 2-3-6 that we talked about. I don't know, and quite frankly, I'm not sure he knows yet, because he has to evaluate and determine that's right. But he will put together something that caters to what we can do. And again, future episode we'll start breaking down some of the personnel on the edge, because some of those edge guys. Yeah, we had some nice gets. We did. Even on the back end. We had a couple corners that I think there's cause to be excited about. But we had a couple edge guys that it was kind of a coup when we landed one or two of them. So those types of guys have a tendency to fit in just about anything you want to do defensively, because there's nothing more mainstream from a defensive skill set and standpoint than the ability to get after the quarterback, if that's what you're able to do as a defensive football player. And a couple of these guys that we brought in, I think, are going to have that ability.
Well, it is exciting. It's new. It's exciting. And as you mentioned, with that, when you've kind of got a new artist, if you will, in Zach Alley, he's waiting to see what colors he has in his palette. You know what I mean? If he's got red paint, he's going to paint the barn red. If he's got yellow paint, he's going to paint the barn yellow. If he's got green paint, he's going to paint the barn green. He's got to get in there, though, to see what colors he has in his palette and formulate that entire thing. I think that's well said by you. Another thank you to our friends at Fortis for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun, our buddy Rick Lewis, for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. Okay, Jed, so as we start to kind of round this thing up and wrap this thing up, anything else on the defense as we kind of come to the conclusion here?
Happy to have Jeff back. Jeff Castile is a tremendous addition to any staff.
Yes.
And the fact that you have a guy who is a rising star in the coaching ranks, like Zach Alley is widely regarded to be, that has the opportunity to sit in a staff room and just bounce ideas and use a guy as a sounding board that has, as a defensive play caller himself, has contributed in a very heavy way to 3 BCS wins under 3 different head coaches. That's the guy that you're bouncing ideas off of.
Pretty
wow. Don't sell that short in terms of when you look at what populates this defensive staff. I like it's a mix of older guys, younger guys, guys that he has been around, guys that understand his system, but also guys that bring some fresh ideas. But I keep going back to Jeff Castile. Even Jake, Jeff's boy. Jake has a history with Zach Alley. He didn't just coach with him at Jack State. They were also, a lot of people forget, Jake Castile was together with him at Boise State. He was on staff. So he has a history with a lot of these guys, but also a lot of these guys he doesn't. They'll bring some fresh ideas. So Zach Alley with Jeff Castile, and the rest of that staff, what's not to like? So I'm really fired up about that.
I am too, and we got a Carl Joseph comparison, and that always gets me excited, gets me going, titillating. Some might even call it, Jed.
Frederick will smack you.
I'm excited. I am not excited to see you get hit, but I am also kind of excited to see you get hit. I just hope it's not that serious when it inevitably happens. Make sure whenever he takes you out, you've got like an ITG hat or something on, so that when they show you on Sports Center, we at least get the free publicity from it.
I'll tell you what, Wes, this has happened one time that I remember, and the reason I remember it so well, truly been taken out. It was in the Little Apple. It was at K-State, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. And the reason I remember, Lori Rice, the football secretary, who's been around since Owen, since me, since she's been around forever, right? Good friends with my wife, Christy. They used to work together in the mall in Morgantown. But Lori's a great gal. And they finally talked her into, hey, why don't you take a trip and go on the sidelines? And they finally talked her into this. And it took them forever to do it. Well, wouldn't you know it?
Oh, no.
She's on the sidelines at K-State. She's standing behind me. Here comes this quick screen. There's a perimeter screen right in front of us. And normally you see these things coming and you're able to navigate around them. It didn't work out. And the next thing you know, it brings me down and I bring Lori down. And she hit hard. She hit hard. I still feel guilty about that. And so we're all picking. I mean, everybody on the sidelines is picking Lori up and patting her off and checking her. Like, hell with Jed.
Hell with Jed. Yeah, Jed's fine.
He can deal with it on his own. But yeah, I was hit pretty good on that one. That's the only time I've been. Even when Carl hit D.D. Westbrook, you remember when Carl just. Of course. I'm in that clip because I've told you this on the show before. I'm about 10 feet from that hit. And I literally thought blood splattered on my shirt. I was expecting it to when I heard the helmet. Oh, it was just, that was vicious. But I didn't get hit. I got out of the way of that one. I've got out of the way of most of them. Knock on wood. Watch me blow an ACL out this year now because we're having this discussion.
Just don't take it. Just don't take anybody else whenever you get hit. All right, especially Lori. All right,
Larry
leave
David,
her alone.
Like Shaq. Remember Larry David took Shaquille O'Neal out in that episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. He tripped him one day. He had front row seats. Don't do that. Don't do that.
I think a good goal in life is to never do what Larry David does and Curb Your Enthusiasm. That is for sure. Right, a final thank you to our friends at Johnston Equipment. You could get 0% financing for 72 months plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnston Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. Fun episode today. I'm fired up for spring ball. Also fired up for the Combine. Reminder, we will have some cool Combine content coming your way here as Wyatt Milam, Sean Martin, and Austin Brinkman underway this week in Indianapolis. I am in Indianapolis as well, too, so we'll have some fun stuff for you out of all of this, depending on what my schedule allows me to get to and who I can talk to and all of those good things. Much like the box of chocolate jokes, you never know what you're going to get, but you're going to get something out of my visit to Indianapolis for the Combine, and so make sure you're keeping an eye and an ear out for all of that. But that'll do it for this edition of ITG. For our producer, Skylar Callahan, the beer truck Big O, he's the signal caller, Jed Drenning, and I'm Wes Euler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.